Hello, Dana. Nice to
Hello.
meet you. It's very good to be here, and I'm very glad that you had the time to make this interview in the middle of all the things you normally have. I'm really happy to be able to talk about CUTLASS SPRING that will be here in Alkantara Festival in the days 25 and 26th of November. About CUTLASS SPRING, just to give a very brief description, you are working a lot about different bodies and ideas that can cross your identity, also to question stereotypes, and exploring the cultural repression as a mother, as a performer, as a lover, and how it shaped your sexual identity. And I have a very simple first questions, which is to know that if you are aware that you are going to present your show in a disco called Lux.
Yes.
You know, I would like to know how you feel about it, because I know that your connection with dance came a lot from dub, from parties, etc. How do you feel presenting this in such a space?
So I remember being with my technical director on tour, and she said, "How do you feel about this?" And I was like, "Yeah. That sounds like a good challenge." And we both like a good challenge. And I probably did have an initial excitement about the fact that it was a club, but the information kind of went in and went out. But now that you're saying it again, okay, well, it's making me sweat. Well, the interview is making me sweat. That's very sexual. It's very romantic.
It's one of the biggest clubs in Lisbon. It has a long story, and I think finally it may be the ideal space for your piece. My second question has to do a bit with that, because it's on your relation with the audience. Because I was reading some interviews you did, and about Yellow Towel, you said something very interesting, that you were looking for avoiding the gaze. How can I be on stage without communicating to the audience in a very direct way, like looking at them, etc. Then some other things came up about the audience, the possibility of having different groups of people in the room when you presented in the United States, and you finally saw Black people on the audience, and how it changed also the dimensions of the piece. And yeah, finally this possibility of having the audience choosing what perspective they want to have during CUTLASS SPRING. All of this made me think about your expectation towards the audience, politically speaking, what dimensions it brings to your work, and how do you construct your work considering all these possibilities?
So I'm thinking about all of these things, and I'm taking them into consideration, but never directly. It's never like, oh, okay, so perhaps, okay, I'm too excited. Should I calm down or shouldn't I? I won't. Okay, so I was watching also then Shira, the new version with my son. And I think it was on Sunday. And there is a scene where Shira is sitting down with all of the other princesses and also Bo. And they are talking about, they're trying to make a strategy because they have to confront the horde. And it's very dangerous, and Shira's a perfectionist, and she's very concerned, and she's like, no, we need to take into consideration all of the possible outcomes. We need to account for every possible thing that might happen, because this could happen. We have to know everything, and we have to be perfectly prepared. Otherwise, the whole thing is like, I'm gonna fuck it all up, and I can't fuck it all up, so we have to be perfectly prepared. And I was listening to her say this, and also I was watching the princesses listening to her say this. And yeah, I was like, but Shira, that's impossible. You cannot possibly know all of the things that are going to happen. Also, like, it seems like a really inefficient use of time and also like quite a limited way of thinking about things, to like, okay, so let me try and think of every possible audience, because I don't know every kind of possible audience. Even if you know what country you're going to, or what city, or the time that you're going, how the hell do you know who's going to be in the audience? How do you know where these people are going to be in their minds? What have they read that day? I mean, it's impossible. And one of the things that I love the most is arriving somewhere and then having a reaction to the work that I could never possibly have expected, or an openness or a closedness. And so I think the way that I prepare myself for the different people who can possibly be in the room is by preparing myself as a human to be as like ready for any kind of action, and to be like a porous and like flexible entity. And and that just like feels like the best approach.
Sure, sure. No, I completely understand that. I was just considering that some artists, they are so aware about how can they feel more comfortable in the program. And I mean, since you had that experience in the United States and you finally felt the difference about having a different audience, I was wondering if it comes to your ethical approach to spaces. But I don't say that that's an obligation, but that's what I was wondering.
I mean, also we all are walking balls of conflicting information and desires. So on the one hand, I find it super interesting, this idea of working on the construction of one's audience, in order to make both the audience and the person presenting the work more comfortable or more open or whatnot. I mean, I can say two things, which that of course I was raised by a Black family. I was raised by a Caribbean family. And so in that realm, I'm of course extremely comfortable in like an all Black setting. However, the rest of my life was lived in all white settings. Every school that I went to, most of my friends, like I'm used to being the only Black person in a room, in a city, anywhere. This is actually what feels more normal to me. So it's always when I think about my experience in the US, it brought up a lot of really confusing feelings, because I'm like, here I am, for instance, in Chicago was the first place that the room was the audience was predominantly Black. And this could feel like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Like my people, I felt so uncomfortable. I was scared. Like,
yes,
I was so scared. It was so then it's like, oh my God, what does it mean that being in a room full of people who have the same skin as me makes me more uncomfortable? What the fuck do I do with that? In a work where I'm talking about exactly this existence and I'm more uncomfortable. I mean, it's beautiful. So it enters into conversation with the work. And again, it's a sensation that I could possibly anticipate, but I couldn't have anticipated everything that came up and then what it produced.
No, definitely.
That performance.
Definitely. And I understand that you work a lot around these ideas of order and chaos. What is interesting is that you are really directly working with the stereotypes sometimes, and the yellow towel is obviously that, about Black culture stereotypes. And I was wondering, how do you feel it transforms people's conceptions? And because in one hand, it's like dealing with stereotypes will be different depending on the audience in one hand, and on the other, it can change the perception, but it can strengthen the stereotypes and just leave them where they are.
The writing around yellow towel and the writing around all the things that I do is always a problematic process. Because of you know, I'm constantly like ducking and hiding. It's like I'm in a boxing ring with the way that I make work and the way that I want to talk about the work. And when you're marketing work, it's not about ducking, it's about landing punches. People want to land punches. They're like, we need to punch people in the face and tell them exactly where they're going to get punched, what time they're going to get punched, and what it's going to feel like to get punched. That's how you sell a piece. Yeah. So then these things are like, they're trying to have a conversation, right? All to say that this whole thing about yellow towels is about stereotypes, or it's about this, or it's about that. It comes in and out of clarity for myself as well, because I do start from a very pointed place. I did start by saying, I'm going to make a piece about Blackness. But then it's like, if you take, if you have like a bottle of like food coloring, and you know what happens when you like drop like the color into a bowl of water? This is kind of how I approach making work. So it's like, I've got my bottle of Blackness, and then I just like drop it into the water, and then I let it diffuse. So I suppose then what seems easiest when I'm writing about the work, or when I'm in conversation with whoever is writing about the work, I just am like, well, here's the bottle and here's the drop that I put Blackness, right? Okay. And what you actually are going to see, and what I'm interested in engaging with, is the diffusion in the water. I'm not just like, the drop is, it's a thing, but I'm not interested in just just putting drops on the stage.
And I was wondering about the roles of dreams on that, because you talked about dreams, and what I see with CUTLASS SPRING is that you are decomposing these considered normal movements, but then there's this level of questioning the dimensionality of the body, because sometimes you are making things in very weird positions, etc. And that made me think a lot about dreaming and about surrealism. And I would like to understand, how do you work with your dreams?
I find it really difficult to exist outside of the realm of dreaming. I think the majority of the energy that I use in a day is used on not letting myself float away. Most of the energy that I spend in a day is repressing my natural tendencies, which is very exhausting. And so performance has become a space where I don't have to attach myself by an anchor to quotidian living. Well, I can't say quotidian living, because my ideal quotidian living would be just being a kind of untethered feather. So I would say then, like, the majority social rule, right? So yeah, so then I suppose there's not really necessarily a process that I need to like really specifically engage in to tap into like a kind of dream state, or a more untethered state, because it's my natural state. So actually all that I need to do is, I'm like, great, just gonna take off of these repression clothes, and now I can just carry on engaging in living and thinking in the way that's natural to me.
So I really feel that it's like a liberation space for you, the performative stage. And it makes me think a lot about this repression you are talking about, which is completely related to sexual claim and sexual intuitiveness, I don't know. And I was wondering about this. How do you feel there's a role of sex for liberation? Because you're not just claiming it individually, the individual repression, but you are also saying that collectively we have been repressed not only as human, but also as Black people. So there's a relation between sexual repression and colonialism that somehow you are deconstructing. I would like to understand, how do you understand that relation?
I don't know. I don't know if I have words yet. It's kind of why I make pieces, is so that I can jump inside of the question and eventually have answers. You know, like for instance, Yellow Towel, I premiered in 2013, and now it's 2020. So it's about now that I'm able to like kind of have some clear responses to the question that I jumped in with. So CUTLASS SPRING is still a baby. My approach also is, I'm like, well, who do I have the most authority on as a human? That would be me. And so generally, I feel mostly comfortable approaching these questions via my own vessel. It feels the safest. And I feel quite confident in that my person is not that original. My person is connected to millions and millions of persons. And so I'm like, it's okay if I'm just talking about my own minutia, because my own minutia is actually connected to everybody else's minutia.
Sure.
You know, of course, it's interesting. Like the anchor of the color of my skin, the anchor of my genitalia, and the anchor of what that does when it's presented in the public realm and has the word sex attached to it, it does something immediately. And I am curious about that, and I'm limited by that, and I'm attacked by that on a regular basis. It's always fascinating, illuminating to listen to people's reactions to what I present, to hearing the kind of the direct associations they make to certain things. And it's always a combination of fascinating and deeply sad, and kind of just basically confirms why I've started looking at a thing. And it's always a bit, I don't know, it's hard to let go. It's hard to like let people make the connections that they make, but it's also exactly what I'm interested in. And I hope, like, hopefully people can get interested in their own reactions and interested in the connections that they're making.
Sure.
I mean, part of why I started making these works where I am showing so much skin on stage is because of I saw a solo by a Black woman in Vienna. Shit, I can't find her name right now. It's really terrible. But it was the first time that I was in a contemporary dance performance where I saw a naked Black woman. And I sat there and I was like, oh, but what the fuck is happening? I was, again, this weird combination of like uncomfortable, and I'm like, why am I uncomfortable? I see naked white people in contemporary dance pieces all the time. What is this doing? Whoa, what's happening? Am I doing some stereotypes? I'm a Black person. Like, why am I looking at her? So this was like super troubling, and like that nope. I gotta get naked on stage. We gotta see some more, like, we need to see more Black skin. So that we can stop doing exactly this boxing and this, like, we gotta unplug the colonial gaze. We gotta like relieve some pressure by just like upping the numbers. I mean, I'm only one other person, but like the only other person. But do you know what?
No, I completely know what you mean, and you completely answer it, because when we talk about post-colonialism, decolonialism, whatever, we are considering that people have to start making a self-reflection and understand how they internalized colonialism, and that's what you're doing. And I think you are doing it from a very honest place without this arrogance of trying to formulate it.
You know, I would also love to like sit. I mean, that's all that I want. Also, it's why I make work, is so I can like sit and like continue talking about something for like 20 years, because that's how much time it takes actually. 50, 100, 2,000 years.
I was thinking that in Yellow Towel you did the choreography, but also the set, the clothes, etc. I don't know the technical team in CUTLASS SPRING. I would like to understand better how do you start constructing your piece in terms of sharing ideas with the team, constructing the text together, having feedback, and what does it changes your autonomy to be able to decide on all the elements on stage or not? Can you share a bit?
Yeah, I think eventually I just like replaced writing out every single thing that I did with, I think, what do I write now? Created by. And I'm like, created by means I created it. And picking of clothing and picking of colors and writing of text and making of music for me is all part of creating. So I find that if it's not going to be me, then I'll write it. Do you know what I mean? I'm just going to assume that people can understand that I created the thing. And if somebody else was involved and created the thing, then I write it.
I was just wondering all these political implications about authorship and about how Black women work has been erased. But besides all that, I think what is interesting for me with this question is to understand the conception of what it is to be an artist, what it is to create. How do you negotiate this with other people? I think it's important because there's a canon, a way of working. I mean, the official way of working. You have the set designer, the light designer, the text, the dramaturgical advisor, blah, blah. And what you are bringing with this answer is a different ontology about what is to be an artist. There's not just one way of doing it.
I'm thinking of two things. Okay, like you're bringing this up, and of course, I think about it a lot, the way that I credit or the way that I document, or like my contribution to archive, the archive, any archive. I went to Jamaica as part of one of the residencies that I did in making CUTLASS Springs. I spent a week in Jamaica with one of my collaborators. We went to this like really wonderful conference about dub music, and what I found so just goddamn gorgeous and exciting, and they were talking about how so many things are undocumented, like the history of like, where did this music come from, and like, where did this movement come from? And it's like this beautiful like thing of, you know, this artist argued with this artist, like, no, it happened when we were sitting like in the club, and like, I don't know, this happened or that happened. But like this kind of like like rupture in memory, or like subjective perspective on memory, how it not only contributes to like a kind of like vastness and elasticity of archive, but also how it contributes to like what comes next. And that is like something that I'm just like, shit, you cannot replace that. When the archive remains a little bit like movable and watery, then it contributes to like kind of like more expansion, more creativity. And this is something that I'm like, that cannot be erased. Like, we cannot give that away. I really am, I'm becoming like, the understanding is becoming more embodied in terms of why I need to actually be a little bit more particular and careful, and a little bit maybe more rigid about how I archive, or how I am in conversation with archive. But I'm also like really we need to also hang on to the way that we have been archiving and the reasons why we have been archiving and the ways that we have been archiving, and not just Black people, but so many cultures, so much cultural erasure of different modes of archiving that we can't lose that either.
I'm loving that. Did you finish?
Yeah.
I'm like here, I want to talk because I'm loving what you're saying, because that's basically my thesis. I'm working on the body as an archive, the body as narrative. What I found beautiful is this oral history. What did my grandmother told me? What did my grandfather said? And that's an archive, definitely. And we definitely have to consider different ways of archiving. So I'm loving that reflection. There's a woman talking about post-archive here in Portugal. Her name is Monica de Miranda. It's like you said, it's not just a Black archive thing. I mean, a lot of cultures that didn't have this official archive. So yeah, definitely.
Or a different kind of official archive. Archives that require trust, like different levels of trust. We're walking archives, right? And we've just been pushed into making a certain kind of archive in order to become like, what's the word?
Legitimate.
Legitimate. It's like there's only a certain kind of archive that is absolutely has the like 100% stamp of approval of legitimacy.
Sure.
But again, I really am. I'm understanding the fact of living in the world that we do live in, and the world has been affected and like changed in the ways that it has been by colonialism. This is the way. And so if we don't want to continue to be erased, and I realize that's it. I'm like, my work is I'm just doing archive work because there's so much mystery in my life, like around my family. I'm like, there's so much that I don't know and that I will never know, and yet that I do know because it's obviously in here. So I'm just like desperately mining myself and what this few means that I have around me to try and like make it such that anyway.
Yeah, but you are doing it brilliantly, and I think that's an intuitive way, and to dig and to mine our own archives. And I was thinking, and we are almost, I still have like 2 questions here, but I was thinking just a bit about this, that in the performative arts, it becomes even more difficult because I was making spoken words for 10 years before I launched my first book, because I had a lot of resistance about making a book. Because it's like, yeah, it's written, it's an object, it enters in the editorial market, and so there's a lot of political decisions that I will not be able to do about the book because he will just flow away. And what I feel is that it becomes more difficult to archive when we are talking about ephemeral performative arts. So in that matter, I think it's more about a philosophy of life. About I want to be an archive while I'm living, while I can say my poetry by heart without a book. I will do it the maximum I can, and and I think some people will come and maybe organize this information, but it can become obsessive, and of course it can interfere on your creative process, not in the best way.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious about the name of the piece. What do you mean with CUTLASS SPRING?
CUTLASS SPRING A is like, as all the titles, it's just like it's a little like a brain teaser. So I'll just say maybe a couple of things because I could talk for a long time. Cutlass, I think about St. Lucia, and I think about my grandfather, and I think about a cutlass. I mean, a cutlass is just like a really normal like tool that you have in the Caribbean for like cutting stuff. I'm thinking about, I saw this video the other day, and like it's a video in Trinidad, and like somebody has like a piece of like a delicious piece of cake. He just like takes out his cutlass. It's like a huge knife. And he's like cuts this piece of cake and gives it to someone. I'm like, the Caribbean, just full of exaggeration. It's so beautiful. So cutlass to me, it like speaks like really, it just like brings up the Caribbean for me really vividly. I think about kind of making a clearing in a field with just a big knife and making space, which connects to spring, which is a time for newness and a time for change and reflection. And
for sure.
My dad used to use Irish Spring soap in the 80s when I was growing up. The smell of my dad, I think about Irish Spring soap, which is a soap that was really like marketed hard in the 80s in a like kind of sexy way. I mean, everything was sexy in the 80s. It makes me think of like teenage boys and just like hyperactive hormones and sexiness.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot, but I have at least 5 more pages of things that I could tell you about the title, but I'll just stop with that.
No, these are great, and this is all present in the work, because the image that you said about the guy with the cutlass, I think the way you grab the objects, it's really like this this nonsense, this exaggeration. Even the microphone sometimes is just there and people are expecting that you use it, and it's just an object.
I hadn't even made that connection, the connection that you just made, this like exaggerated, like the sense of humor in the Caribbean with the way that I'd never thought about that. This is why I love doing having conversations with people.
Maybe I'm overthinking also.
No, I think it's I work very subconsciously as well.
And I'm ending all these interviews with a question. The question is about what you need as an artist in a period like this to be able to continue your work. I know it's a huge question.
I'm like, oh, that was 25 possible questions in one. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, I don't want to talk about anything. I don't want to have any interviews. Don't ask me to do anything. Don't ask me to put anything online. Just leave me alone. And now I'm like, oh my God, I need to engage. I really need to engage. It's like a pretty vital energy source. So I'm really happy to talk to you, and I'm really happy it was you. This has been like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you too, and I hope you have a good and safe trip to Portugal. I will be here. I would like to meet you personally, and I would like to see your CUTLASS SPRING live. It was really good to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Me too.